Alright, hello and welcome. We'll be going over the patch notes for October 10th for Deadlock. Seems to be a pretty big patch where they introduce Ranked, which will be starting on October 15th, so in about 5 days. You need a total of 50 games played, and it will be solo queue only for the current moment. And it seems like every Tuesday they'll be having an algorithm that checks everyone's performance, I'm assuming throughout the week played, and ranking you accordingly, or adjusting ranks accordingly. I'm not too sure how it'll happen, but seems like there'll be limited time zones or time frames for the ranked games, which will be 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. And I guess you can select multiple time zones, or to select from multiple time zones to be able to fit towards your schedule. And you're assigned the region that has the best ping, which makes sense. They added a quick cast functionality, which I am a very big fan of, because there's a few champion heroes that I play that benefit from quick casting, like the goop monster. Don't really know his name off the top of my head. And then I think Geist is one of them as well. Anyone with grenades usually benefits from quick casting. They added impert buffering for ability usages, so you can queue up abilities for combos. And then a lot of bug fixes here. Added Thai and Indonesian localization. You can no longer pause within the first 3 minutes. You can adjust individual players' volume ratings, which I think is very huge. And they made it to where certain heroes have better chances to be in the duo lane. Alright, then after all these bug fixes, we got minions and lane guardians, or attack range versus lane guardians got decreased by 1.5 meters, so they have to get closer to it, which allows certain players that have like shotguns to be able to go up a little bit closer to actually get better damage off. But they also nerfed the player range where they can attack the guardian. I noticed this actually early before the patch notes came out. It's a little bit less, but it's more in line with when you get up the ramp and past like a little banner for the dual lanes. I don't know how it is for the solo lanes, but beginning of the game they reduced minion damage to guardians just to help delay 5-minute guardian takedowns. I know that was happening quite frequently in the games I've been playing, so it's a little nice to see. And they also increased guardian damage versus players, which makes the dives a little bit more risky, especially if you're staying underneath your guardian, and if they have to go in melee distance, it'll make it a little bit more punishing. Then we have the jungle camps. Jungle camps got some changes. The medium camps spawn a little bit 2 minutes faster. Hard camps, the triple red camps, spawn 1 minute later, but they are in line with the teleporters, which they added a few more teleporters to allow jungling to be a little bit easier. Then we got the golden statues, which are the things you can go around meleeing or shooting and then have a spawn buff depending on whether it be fire rate, bonus health, souls. They changed those around. I'm not too sure what they were beforehand. I mean, though it says right here, but decreased it by a minute on the spawn times for the breakables, and the bonus upgrade time changed from 15 to 10 minutes, and the golden statue health buff increased from like the bonus health. Okay, yeah, basically gives more health now when you get that rolled. Statues now have a tier 3 upgrade at 25 minutes, where it gives, I'm assuming it's all these, with it being fire rate, ammo, CD reduction, weapon damage, health, spirit power. Then we have some changes to the mid-boss. It has extra regen, and the creep buffs was increased or rescaled from a flat 70% to 50, 70, 90, depending on how many mid-bosses have been slain, as well as the rejuve respawn rescaled from a flat 50 to a 40, 50, 60, depending on the number of bosses slain, nothing more than past 3. The urn had some pretty big changes. When you pick up the urn, you now get revealed, and you can get heavy melee to drop the urn, and it now gives everyone one of the golden statue buffs from around the map. They also increased the soul the soul bounty for it. And it also just falls down a little bit faster, so no more looking up and waiting forever for it to finally be able to be picked up. Then they made some changes to their comeback mechanic, which seems to be based on network calculation and the strength of dying heroes. So, assuming that means if they're on a bigger lead, that you get more souls from it. But they weren't too specific on what's happening here. But so let's see. They increased everyone's move speed. Lifesteal now has a diminishing returns, so just permanently stacking lifesteals not the greatest anymore, but I mean it's still pretty decent because it's lifesteal. Then we have the new teleporter location changes, where you have one back towards the outer walkers, where you have about 2 KMs on each side spawning, which for those that like the jungle will be able to do so quite a little bit more easier. And then also some near the middle lanes, near the guardians, which will make it a little easier to navigate between those and trying to gank lanes. And again, those all spawn in at 8 minutes or become open at 8 minutes. It's timed up with the bigger mobs, so if you're jungling, it will be a little easier past 8 minutes, so you might want to help your lane partner through the early game if you get stuck with a lane partner. I mean, obviously, if you're in a solo lane, try to switch it up if you're going to want to do jungle. And here they have the locations, which were the same as above. But after that, we have the item changes. So monster rounds versus NPCs. I'm assuming that counts minions too. I wasn't too sure. I never really paid attention. But was nerfed by 5%. The weapon damage on restorative shot was nerfed by 1%, which I'm assuming somewhat affects the healing guaranteed back, because I wasn't too sure on the scaling for it. But basic magazine has more ammo, just a 2% amount, but depending on what character you're running, that can be pretty big, especially towards the late game. Melee charges cooldown was increased by 5 seconds, which is a pretty big hit to the early laning phases for Abrams, Moan, Krill, anyone that really likes to be in melee distance, lady guys. And the ammo was increased on long range to be by 5%, so about 1 extra bullet or 2 per long range item purchase now. And then we have Tesla bullets. The spirit scaling that was increased by 0.03. Alchemical fire now behaves like other grenades, which I'm assuming is inactive. It doesn't bounce off walls, and it has its base DPS increased by 10. Then we have toxic bullets, which is now built up a little bit slower, so a little bit longer time to start the uptime on the poison DOT. Then we have frenzy, which the low HP threshold was increased from 40% to 50%, which, I mean, I never really built the item, but I'm guessing that helps it, where when you get below 50% now, it starts to take over its bonus damage. I'm assuming that's what that is. Ricochet range reduced from 14 meters to 11 meters. That seems to be decently nerfed because just less range. Silencer spirit power increased from 12 to 18. So anyone that's running a hybrid build will really like that change. Not too sure what it did beforehand. Vampiric burst added ammo on active increased from 50% to 75%, and cooldown reduced by 30 seconds. Then we got spiritual overflow, which no longer grants fire rate, but upon full build-up it grants that fire rate plus some on return. So overall buff once you get stacked up, but initially a nerf just until you're fully built on those spiritual overflows. And then of course increased by 5 spirit power. Then we got the green items. Healing ray regeneration increased from 17 to 19. Same total heal, so it's a little bit of a nerf because it takes a little bit longer to reach that full amount of healing. Extra regen was flattened out to be just straight 3 from 2.8, which is a nice little buff. And they also increased the ammo on it by 2%. Extra stamina, which I mean, for me is always a must buy because being able to actually dash more often is really nice. Got buffed a little bit with the stamina recovery by 2%, but had its fire rate reduced, and it now gives health, which is a little nice for the early game since you do buy it around 500, a little 1,000 souls depending on if you need more sustain or just dodge. Extra health now gives extra weapon damage by 1%. Enduring speed had its move speed reduced because everyone got a move speed buff, just counteracts it. And the slow resistance reduced by 5%. Restorative Locket gained a spirit resistance increase by 2% and gives 1 spirit. That's an interesting. I don't know the exact spirit amounts just quite yet. Return Fire has its cooldown increased by 5 seconds, which is an overall nerf because you less bullet reflective. And so let's see, and bullet resistance decreased. Health Nova, Spirit Power increased by 2, Combat Barrier, weapon damage reduced by 3%. Fortitude, health increased by 25. Life Strike, heal increased from 55 to 65% for melee damage, which will help sustain the mid-game a little bit better for those melee builds. Superior Stamina, essentially got the same buff that Extra Stamina got, which was a slightly buff. It's a little bit bigger of a buff because it's 5% instead of 2%, but roughly the same. A Veil Walker's speed increase by 1, and Majestic Leap's cooldown increased by 3 seconds, so less leaping around for those people that like playing Lash. Rescue Beam, not too sure what it does, but I'm assuming that's healing. Cast range reduced from 36 to 32 meters. Leech's weapon damage was increased by 5%, and the Spirit Power was increased by 6%, which is a pretty substantial buff for this late game item because I believe it's like 6,200, and some heroes really like to use that build, so they would be very happy with this buff. Siphon Bullets, the lifesteal on per bullet was increased by 5, so it looks like there's going to be a lot more healing in the game, at least from the vitality side of things. In lifesteal, even though they made it where it does have diminishing returns. Spirit items, extra spirit power increased by 1, ammo scavenger, spirit power per soul reduced from 2 to 1, and max stacks increased from 1 to 2, which sort of counteracts this spirit power per soul, so it just takes longer to ramp up. Withering Whip no longer grants 50 health, but now it grants 100 bullet shield, and the cooldown reduced by 4 seconds. Cold Front cooldown reduced from 34 to 28. Mystic Vulnerability fixed its stacking with escalating exposure, so just a bug fix. Slowing Hex slow reduced from 30 to 25%. Improved Spirit Power increased from 23 to 28. Improved Burst, max health damage reduced from 9 to 7, so it's a little less potent. Knockdown's cooldown was buffed in terms of 8 seconds less per cast. Ethereal Shift can no longer be ended early. Torment Pulse's interval is now fixed and does not get reduced with cooldown reduction. Interesting, I didn't realize it was affected by CDR. Superior cooldown now grants 100 Spirit Shield, that'd be a nice little buff. Escalating Exposure gets less, or buffed in terms of you get less negative spirit resistance on damage reduced. Yeah. That might be a nerf. Not too sure. Amplification per staff reduced from 6 to 5%, and duration reduced from 15 to 12 seconds. Refresher's cooldown was increased to 230 from 212, which is an 18-second nerf, which is pretty huge in the grand scheme of things in a team fight, or just the time in between team fights. Mystic Reverb slow reduced from 50% to 40%, so it looks like a lot of spirit items got a little bit nerfed, but in terms of more defenses. Now we have the heroes. Abrams got his health nerfed by 30, which affects his early game phase quite a bit, and his health per boon increased from 32 to 34, which is with the health nerf, it looks like it's less in total, so still not like a nerf, but just bringing it back up to speed. Fixed the shoulder charge sensitivity bugs that allowed you to turn more than intended. And his seismic impact now allows for some maneuverability, so you can go around smaller objects that are like corners if you're casting it right on a corner, because that was a little annoying to encounter. Then we have Bebop, whose Sticky Bombs now has a limited stack of 15, no longer infinite scaling, and he loses 2 stacks on death, that way it's more punishing for when he dies, but its growth is increased by 1.5% per stack. You guys' hook range increased, but he was nerfed in the regard where he can now hit the enemy minions. It does kill them instantly, but it does save you from getting grabbed, so you can play around behind your minions without having a worry of getting hooked, unless, he's jumping or is on a bridge. And then we have a bug fix where it grabbed players around corners, which was kind of infuriating to play against, because you make it around a corner, you fill and save, you break line of sight, just to get hooked either way because of lollipopping. Now we have his beam, movements slow reduced by 5%, so it doesn't slow as much, and the duration doesn't scale for spirit power, which I personally didn't know was a thing, which it kind of makes sense why it was so long in the late game. But they also, to counteract that, they increased his beam duration by 2 seconds just to help him towards the early game to mid game with that duration, since it no longer scales with spirit power. And his uppercut now applies a 15% slow rate in the landing radius for 5 seconds. So if you're like someone that likes to put a bomb on a minion and then knock it over back to an enemy that's hiding behind something, they will now have a slower time dealing damage back to you. Dynamo, Quantum Entanglement cooldown increased by 2.5 seconds, and his tier 3 also reduces the cooldown by 4 seconds. So not much for Dynamo. Haven't really played him that much or at all, so I don't know how much this will affect him. I don't know which one his entanglement is, and I don't exactly recognize the ability because I haven't played him that much. Grey Talon, arrow cycle time increased from 0.45 to 0.55. Doesn't change anything in DPS, just I think it's a slower time to shoot. Not too sure what that exactly does, but if it doesn't do anything DPS wise, then I think it's fine. A lot of bug fixes with the Rain of Arrows alternate cast, causing you to hit the ground as soon after you cast, and the Guided Owl colliding with nearby objects during cast time. The fire rate on Grey Talon is no longer scales with spirit power. Really, it's scaled with spirit power, that's a little ridiculous. And the base damage now scales with spirit power though. So, spirit power build for the owl, still pretty decent, and now your bullets will hurt a little more. The Guided Owl has a grace period of 3 seconds, but it was increased to 4 for kills. And they fixed the bug where the grace period is still requiring that he gets the kill rather than the target just dying overall. And then move speed no longer scales with spirit power. So if you're having issues dealing with a quick Grey Talon, that should no longer be a thing if they're going spirit build. And base stamina increased by 1. So 1 extra dash, which would be, or a jump, which will be beneficial in trying to get away or stay at a long range distance. Haze, fixation max stacks increased from 30 to 40, and the fixation tier 3 reduced from 0.22 to 0.15. The bullet dance no longer grants fire rate, but after you hit tier 3, it'll grant some evasion, because you lose 25% initially, but you gain it as you max it out. And you now get 2 targets of fixation per shot, I believe is what I'm reading here. Infernus, catalyst, good lord, catalyst damage reduced, amplification reduced by 5%, and the tier 3 damage amplification increased by 5%. So basically you're losing it early by getting it back on your max. Ivy, improved default camera position, and take flight control keys are now similar to Vindicta's. Haven't played either of them, so I'm not sure if how that interaction was working, but also fixed some issues with control on take flight when near a wall. Lady Guys had a bug that could cause some units to take more damage than intended with Essence Bomb when multiple targets are hit. so that's fixed. Her life drain can now be an alternate casted on ally heroes. So does that mean that she heals allies or takes health from allies? Not too sure. Add a double tap accidental protection for life drain to help against instant cancellations. That's a nice quality of life. Malice slow duration reduced from 6 to 4 seconds, and the amplification damage reduced from 16 to 13 seconds. You can now see how many Malice stacks you have when you have on you as the opponent. Okay, yeah. Okay, so that way you can see how many stacks you got as the opponent. Okay, got it. Lash. Base bullet damage reduced from 10 to 9, so he does a little bit less damage early, which should help with his lane bully a little bit. But his flog heal versus heroes reduced by 10% and versus minions by 5%, so his whip is a little less punishing, which would be nice. Now we have McGinnis. No longer has spear resistance innately, but she does have 15 bullet resistance. So her early game should be a little bit more tanky, because at least until like items start getting purchased. Because I mean, actually, let me reword that. She's more tanky to like the base attacks, but for people building spirit builds, her spirit lanes are going to be a little bit more punishing than before. Her mini turrets no longer have an extra charge at initial allocation. The cooldown is reduced by 6 seconds to compensate for that, and the duration is also decreased by 6 seconds. Her mini turret's health scaling reduced by 10%, and her recharge time reduced by 2%. I'm assuming that's time to like in between each throw. And the cast range was increased by 5 meters, so you can send it out a little bit further. The damage reduction on the turrets against minions was increased by 10%, so it takes more damage from them. And the damage reduction against objectives was increased, so a little less tanky against the guardians, walkers, base bosses. They fixed the ricochet not bouncing off mini turrets, not targets. And the mini turret spawn time reduced by 0.75 seconds, and the attack delay reduced by 0.15 second. So I'm assuming once they spawn, they spawn quicker and they shoot faster off spawn. Heavy barrage radius increased by 0.5 meters, so you got a little bit of extra range on when you're casting your ultimate to be able to do damage. Mirage Tornado now has a range, or uses a range for travel distance instead of travel duration. And enemies that have already been hit by fire scarabs now let the next scarab projectile pass through them, so adding piercing if they already have the, I guess, debuff. Mirage Gen Mark, base damage reduced by 4, the scaling from spirit power increased by 0.15, and the reveal duration increased by 1 second. The Traveler ability now causes your camera to move to the destination during the channel, and the tier 1 is now it's plus 2 movement speed instead of minus 20 CD, while the tier 2 is now minus 30 seconds on the cooldown. So they swapped over the tier 1 and tier 2 and buffed the cooldown reduction on the tier 2. And then for the tier 3 upgrade, they increased the fire rate by 10%. Mo and Krill combo tier 1 now grants, so the ult now grants bullet resistance while channeling, but it no longer grants 28-second cooldown reduction. But they decreased the cooldown by 20 seconds to compensate for that, so overall buff. Now Krill, when he ults, gets damage resistance, so that way allies can't assist the person getting comboed out really as much as they used to be. Then we have Paradox. Bullet growth per boon increased by 0.12, and the time wall bullet duration reduced by 0.3 seconds. I don't know too much about Paradox, so for those that play Paradox, hopefully this makes sense. They fixed the bug where the time wall was not being spawned when looking down while casting. And the paradoxal swap cooldown increased by 17 seconds, pretty big nerf. But the range is decreased by 5 meters. The Tier 1 upgrade now reduces cooldown by 15 seconds, and the Tier 3 upgrade now increases range by 20 meters. So overall, the Paradoxal swap was nerfed, so anyone facing Paradox expect to be swapping less often with Paradox. The Pulse Grenade radius was decreased by 1 meter, so it's not as big as an AoE, by like 2 meters in total, because diameter was decreased by 2 meters in that sense. The damage amplification of per stack was increased by 1%, while the Tier 3 upgrade no longer damage amplifies by 2%, but it also increases the radius by 1 meter per pulse. Pocket's shotgun fall off, so Pocket's range was nerfed on his gun. The Enchanter Satchel damage now respects line of sight, and so I guess that's a bug. Enchanter Satchel now shows an AoE indicator for Pocket while channeling. Affliction DPS Spirit Power Scaling reduced by 0.06, and the Barrage Radius reduced by 2 meters, and the Tier 3 upgrade now increases the radius back to the normal. 7 received a base regen buff of basically doubling his base regen, and his move speed scaling with Spirit Power reduced by 0.008, and the Lightning Bolt Tier 3, which I'm assuming is the thing that he launches to help clear minion waves or just have DOT, was increased by 2 meters from 1 meter on the Tier 3 upgrade. Shiv, never played. Slice and Dice Spirit damage scaling went up by 0.1. Slice and Dice Tier 1 improved by 0.25 seconds. The Rage Decay rate reduced by 0.10, and the Rage Buffer duration increased by 5 seconds, how long it stays before it starts to decay. Okay, so the Rage duration is a lot longer. Vindicta. Reverted recent fall-off damage changes. Fall-off increased from 58 meters to 64, so longer range. Bullet damage growth per boon reduced by 0.24. Yeah, 0.24. Flight duration no longer scales with Spirit Power, so no longer fly time. But at Tier 2, it now increases the duration by 6 seconds, which is the combat for that Spirit Power scaling nerf. Flight bonus move speed above base now scales at 50% effectiveness. So as you build more move speed, you won't be able to fly as quickly as initially would have been previous to this patch. Vindicta no longer has a minus 10% base bullet resistance, so her early game phase should be a bit better now with basically getting 10 bullet resistance back. Health growth per boon reduced by 5. Gun cycle time increased by 0.04. DPS rescale to remain the same after the above changes are calculated in, so that's just more of a feeling on the gun cycle time because the DPS isn't really affected. So stake duration reduced from 2 seconds to 1.75. Assassinate bonus souls is now unsecured, so if she gets killed with assassinate, if you're in a dual lane, your ally can now deny those souls, or she has to spend time to claim those souls instead of just going back to farming or DPSing others in the fight. Shooting while flying now has similar speed impact as on the ground, and flight air acceleration decreased a little. Vindicta's Crow familiar percent damage and no longer affects the mid-boss. Viscous, this is the slime boy. Goo Ball no longer triggers on hit effect when in ethereal shift. Fixed superior stamina dash count not working with Goo Ball. Goo Ball's stun duration decreased from 1 second to 0.7. And the splatter base damage reduced from 10 to 90, which will help in the early game against his foes. Well, his foes will have an easier time not taking as much damage. The Tier 2 upgrade on the splatter reduced from 70 to 60, and the splatter spirit damage scale now increased by 0.4, so better spirit scaling on the splatter, but less damage initially. And then fix the instant cast not working for the paddle punch. So that's one other thing that quick casting or instant casting will help with. That's nice. Orden Alchemical Flask cooldown reduced from 14 to 12, and the damage is increased by 10. And the Tier 1 upgrade gives 1 stamina reduction, and so when it hits an ally, they now lose 1 stamina, or 1 extra stamina. I don't know what the base values are. And the Tier 2 upgrade now gives an extra 50 damage. Warden's last stand channel duration was decreased by 0.02 seconds, and the range was increased by 1 meter. Wraith's card trick spirit scale reduced by 0.1, and a generation via melee for the card trick was reduced by 50. So incentivizing Wraith to stay more at range, I'm assuming is what that eventually is what they're wanting. Yamato's power slash cooldown increased by 2 seconds, so less slashing in the early game, which will be beneficial. And Tier 2 reduces that cooldown by 2 seconds to bring it back up to speed, so around probably 30,000 souls. I don't know the exact soul count. But Yamato's Shadow Transformation no longer grants you bullet and spear resistance, and the duration is decreased by 0.5 seconds. Alright, so even though I didn't know what half of these things in this patch notes were, this was the patch notes. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I will try to be coming out with these every time there's a patch, as long as I can stay on top of it. But until next time, goodbye.